It so happened that the girl ended up in the forest with a guy who could no longer hold on and admitted that she was driving him crazy. He can't get used to her gorgeous body, and even after so much time, he enjoys every millimeter of her hair, body, and face, as if there is nothing more beautiful in this world for him. The girl at this moment thinks only about the fact that no matter what he says now, the main thing is to return home and not get into trouble. Since he still wouldn't let her go, she had to not resist and listen to him silently. But as soon as he started to allow himself too much, the lady made it clear that she shouldn't be treated like that. She immediately pushed him away and did it so hard that it hurt him a lot. The girl had already endured a lot of things, but this was too much. After hinting that they had too little time left before the arrival of the royal ship, she said without hesitation that she was not who he thought she was. And if he thought that everything was very simple, and she could easily agree to something like that, then it is not so. Some strange dialogue is taking place between them, and it is not entirely clear whether they know each other at all. Only one thing is obvious. The girl is not delighted that she has to be in such unpleasant company, and it is late in the forest. Meanwhile, this guy doesn't stop. He reminds that since they've already gone too far, she can't back down. After this, he asks that when they were alone, she could address him not as a prince, but simply by his name, Emir. Viola tried to move away to a safe distance again, but he grabbed her hand and didn't let her do it, as if hinting that he wouldn't let her go anyway. And that's not all. At some point, he starts to allow himself even more and warns that until he gets what he wants, they won't leave here, no matter how much she wants it. Viola is already starting to say directly that she doesn't like it and push him with all her might, but nothing works. Emir is so persistent that it's already becoming too serious. He literally doesn't listen to her and does things his own way. But fortunately, she's not so soft-natured as to let him treat her like that. She tried again to wait for the moment when he would not be waiting. She pushed him and started to run away as far as possible because this is the only way to get rid of him. Viola was in tears. She regretted that she had ended up in this place and that she had even gone outside alone. The girl remembered this lesson for a long time, and now the main thing is to run as fast as possible. With all this, from the very beginning, she did not understand what was happening. The guy talked to her as if they knew each other, but she simply did not remember him. The girl, even looking at herself, does not quite understand why she was so unusual in this matter. Some time ago, she was riding her bike home as usual and nothing foreshadowed trouble, when suddenly, a terrible situation happened. Viola saw these pictures on her way home and felt as if this was the world that was much closer and more familiar to her than this one where she was now. Anyway, now is not the best time to figure out what happened. You need to get to a safe place as soon as possible and not think about anything else. But she didn't succeed. The girl continued to sort out this situation and remembered that the guy called her Viola and himself Emir. At first, these names seemed very strange and unusual to her, but at some point she realized that she had heard them somewhere. After that, some memories immediately appeared of her sitting at home on her bed and reading her favorite book. Literally a moment later, she realizes that this is the same Emir, the second prince of the kingdom, who was one of the main characters of the novel. It turns out that she ended up in another world, or more precisely, in the world of that very work that she never managed to finish reading. Only judging by her new appearance, the girl ended up in the body of Empress Viola, the villain who dies first. Perhaps everything would not be so bad if it were not for one very important point. The villainess really loves the attention of men, and not a single day goes by that she does not go on dates, and without repeating candidates. According to the plot, everything should have been something like this. She arranges a date with the Emir in the forest, and they have a very pleasant time together. After some time, the emperor sees them, and without thinking, decides to take revenge and destroys each of them for betrayal. Since he does not tolerate this, there could be no other solution. He easily says goodbye to those who betray or deceive him, especially specifically. Realizing all this, Viola does not understand what to do next. She doesn't like being in the body of this villainess at all, because her way of life is very different from the one she will have to adhere to. She is the old one, and Viola are completely different people. Now she doesn't even have a rough plan of where she can run, and who can help her, because surely her reputation isn't the best, so there would be those who wish her well. Now only one thing is clear. If she communicates with other guys as little as possible and stays away from Amura, then she can live much longer than she should according to the plot. At some point, the girl stops to rest a little and notices the silhouette of some guy. She looks at him and remembers that he looks very much like the Emperor. She looks at him with frightened eyes and has no idea what to expect from him, at least for now. Emmer is not around, so it is too early to punish her, and there is nothing for it. She understands that he was looking for her, and most likely, now there will be a lot of questions about what she is doing here and why she came to this forest all alone and didn't tell him anything. I wonder what it's like to realize that in front of her stands the very person who will sooner or later destroy her. Everyone knows him as the Tyrant Kylo. As soon as she starts talking to him, an Amur appears from the bushes and addresses her by name, which immediately makes it clear to the Tyrant that they were here together. The girl looks at him and has no idea why he is doing this, because with his words, he literally confirmed the fact that they are here together and gave the Tyrant the right to take revenge in that very second. It turns out he simply didn't recognize the Emperor, but it was too late. His assistants immediately surrounded him, threw him to the ground, and didn't let him leave. Viola looks at this and is afraid that they can do the same to her. But if the guy had just hidden, everything could have been completely different. Meanwhile, Kylo turns to the girl and asks why she still hasn't called him by name and tried to explain anything. It turns out that in the Empire, there is a rule that if a person does not pronounce the name of the person he saw when meeting, it is a sign of disrespect. And if this happens in relation to the Emperor, some are severely punished for it. The girl thanked him for reminding her about it and not punishing her right away. She explained that she was just very scared and forgot the way home. Therefore, she made such a terrible mistake and wants to apologize. He starts to come closer and closer to her and hints that now it would be better for her not to make up any legends and tell the truth, because he already understands everything. Viola starts looking him straight in the eyes and tries to change the subject. But it seems that she just doesn't know yet and hasn't felt all the anger and power of this tyrant. If you anger him, there will be no turning back. She's already very lucky that he's not as aggressive towards her as he was towards that guy. Although since they were here together, they deserve the same punishment. It is clear that now the tyrant expects the truth from her, because he has already caught her on dates with others more than once, and understands perfectly well why she suddenly needed to go into the forest at night without warning him about it. Therefore, now everything depends only on her. She can either improve the situation and get rid of the punishment, or, on the contrary, only anger him. Viola immediately began to ask him to believe her. Supposedly she is his wife, who will not allow herself to deceive her husband. This sounds very strange on his part, because the Emperor has already been convinced of the opposite more than once and knows very well what kind of person she is. Surprisingly, after these words, he actually took the sword away from her, as if he believed her and changed his mind about taking revenge. Really, a miracle happened, and she was very lucky in this situation, and everything is too obvious and strange that she managed to convince him at all. Anyway, her main mission is to survive and hold out here as long as possible. If everything ends well, maybe she will prove her loyalty and stop being the villain he is used to. She opens her eyes and sees that everything is not as wonderful as she understood. The tyrant took her away from the sword, only to destroy the snake nearby on the tree. She gradually approached her and was almost invisible. Therefore, at first, the operator got rid of her, since he himself is very afraid of such forest dwellers. After that, he again hinted that she should not rejoice ahead of time, because at any moment he could end up in her place. At that moment, Viola understood everything. If he was really evil, he would get rid of her the second he saw that guy. And since she is still alive, it means that he will not do it, even if he intimidates and approaches again with a sword. When suddenly the most interesting thing happened, Kalo suggested that she prove that she is worthy of being the mistress of the palace. The girl doesn't quite understand how to do this yet, but the main thing is that he gave her a chance and isn't going to destroy her right here and now. It's clear that it's better not to ask questions. She should figure out how to do it herself. But for starters, at least, it would be nice to be in a calm environment and think everything through carefully. A miracle happened, and he still said how it was possible, namely through a marriage vow if of course she was ready for it and did not want to die. Sounds good and much better than complete uncertainty. If we are talking about some kind of relationship or promise, then of course she agrees to it. Viola kissed him first and whispered that she would try not to disappoint him, and that from that day on, she would become a completely different person, whom he would simply not recognize and would never stop admiring. After that, he looked at her with his special look and decided that if she agreed, then why not make sure of it right now? He grabbed her, pulled her closer to him and, just in case, asked her again if she was responsible for her words and would not resist if he did what he was about to do. Despite the fact that they have been in a relationship for a long time and know each other very well, there has never been any romance between them, much less kisses. There used to be a lot of first moves on the part of the guy, but the villain deliberately did not notice this and did not reciprocate. Accordingly, as soon as he heard these words from her, he immediately took advantage of the opportunity and did what she had been refusing all this time. The tyrant loved her from the very beginning, but over time the villain seemed to move away, and he missed her very much. Only thanks to his great love, this relationship still exists. The guy forgave her too much. He constantly saw her with other guys, destroyed them, but left her alive. He always had hope that she would change someday and see in him someone she could truly love. It turns out that there was much less love on his part than on hers. And since there is another girl in the body of this villainess, perhaps this relationship has a chance. After this long-awaited moment happened, the guy literally blossomed before our eyes. He doesn't look like a tyrant at all. Kylo became a very nice guy, who doesn't look like what others are used to seeing him as. Meanwhile, the next day came. Viola woke up because her whole body hurt. She felt very hot and it was unbearable to continue sleeping. The only thing that makes her happy is the beautiful and cozy room she woke up in. It so happened that the girl doesn't even remember how she ended up here. And when she fell asleep, everything happened as if in a fog. I started looking at everything around me and thought that this was definitely some kind of dream, because in reality, this simply couldn't happen. It turns out that the pain in her body was because the girl scratched herself on a branch, but she doesn't remember at all how it happened or who treated her wound. Then she noticed a wound on her neck. It seemed like Viola was unconscious, and something happened during that time. But that's not the most important thing. Now she needs to get used to the new conditions, to what awaits her next, and not forget about the promise. The girl can't believe that she is in this world and everything is real. The only thing she managed to remember exactly was that wonderful kiss with the Emperor, which she really wants to repeat again. She has never experienced such wonderful feelings and does not understand how a real villain could ignore this wonderful guy and choose others. It turns out that there was a complete incompatibility. The girl who had never even thought about any kind of relationship before ended up in the body of a villain who can't live without the attention of cute guys. It is impossible to believe that despite such a way of life, her tyrant husband tolerated it and did nothing to her. He did not even try to talk about it or just break up with her. As soon as Viola came to her senses a little, her assistant immediately ran up to her, opened the door without warning, as if she wanted to tell her something very important. The woman admitted that she was very worried about her and was very happy when she found out that everything was okay with the lady. Viola started to smile, because at least she has one person here who definitely treats her well no matter what. As usual, they prepared a bath for her, strewn with flowers, created a very pleasant atmosphere, and helped her get herself in order. Viola never ceases to be amazed at how such a villain, who did not deserve all this and betrayed her husband, could live in such luxurious conditions. The girl happily took advantage of this opportunity and thanked each of her assistants for creating such beauty for her. They were not used to hearing such words from her, but still, everyone was very pleased. They said that if she needed anything, she could call someone and any request would be fulfilled in just a few minutes. They would do whatever she wanted. Viola enjoyed this process to the fullest. She constantly felt the beautiful floral aroma and wanted it not to end. Then, she finally started thinking about something more serious, because at least she had already managed to change what was happening and, unlike the original plot, she and Amor were alive and this could not but please. And yet it is too early to relax. There is one small problem because of which Viola is very worried. Amor is not afraid of the Emperor at all and can reveal their secret at any time convenient for him. In general, it is better for her not to quarrel with him and try to stay away. But now she is just glad that she was able to survive and live to this wonderful moment. If she could, she would never leave this house and would enjoy this bath without interruption. Everything was so wonderful that she didn't even look around and didn't notice how another person appeared in this room. She didn't even hear his steps and didn't notice until that moment. And only after the guy said something, she got very scared and looked in his direction. The girl definitely did not expect this. He says he's ready for something, although Viola asked her assistants not to let anyone into this room until she comes out and says so. Could it be that this is another date that she had planned with this man? Only after her own promise, she will have to somehow refuse him and ask him to leave. It will be very awkward if her husband sees this and thinks that she has deceived him again. The girl looks at this guy and does not understand how to react to this at all. She couldn't think of anything better and just screamed at the whole mansion. Her assistant immediately approached her, which really started to embarrass the guy. The villain usually didn't behave like that. And on the contrary, she was happy and couldn't wait to meet. The assistant asked what happened and the girl continued to scream. The woman realized that something was wrong and the lady was clearly unhappy. The woman immediately started blaming the guy and asked what he had done. He immediately started covering up and said he didn't understand anything. He explained that he hadn't done anything, but the assistant didn't even listen to him and started throwing him out. She warned him that if she saw him in this house again, he would regret it very much and would never be able to leave here again, since he himself knew what the emperor would do to him. Then she approached the lady and asked how she felt. The girl said that everything was fine. She was just scared and didn't expect to see this guy here. The woman asked her to calm down and promised that she wouldn't let this happen again, and then offered to walk her to the bed. The assistant sincerely does not understand how this could have happened. It seems as if he knew some secret entrance that the real villain told him about. Otherwise, he simply could not have gotten into that room. Viola starts drying her hair and tells her assistant that she is not guilty of anything. Besides, after this situation, the guy will definitely not want to come back. The girl thanked the assistant for trying so hard to please and doing everything possible for her comfort. The villain usually didn't say this, so she was very pleased to hear it. But that's not all. The lady thought that was the end of it. But it was just beginning. The assistant brought two guys to her and said that it was time for a massage, and everything would be fine if not for one strange moment. The woman whispered that everything would be the way she liked it. Viola tensed up and thought about what that could mean. She looked towards those guys and began to hope that they wouldn't allow themselves too much. After they started to come closer, they started to have a strange smile, as if they themselves were waiting for this moment. Too suspicious. After they started taking off their shirts, the lady understood everything. She became embarrassed again and no longer knows how to deal with it. It seems that literally at every stage, strangers will continue to approach her with similar intentions. She is trying to find an answer to the question of why they needed to take off their clothes, but she still hasn't found an answer. This is too much. She thought that now they would pounce on her and want to do the same thing as the previous stranger. The lady starts calling the assistant to figure out why she allowed this to happen again. It turns out that this is not the first time they have done such a massage. The villainess really loved to invite them, and today it is strange for them that the mistress is even afraid to look in their direction. They asked if she is really tired of them and wants to choose someone else. Viola instantly blushed. She was so embarrassed that she even closed her eyes and seemed to be speechless. It was very difficult for her to feel comfortable imagining why they actually came and why the real villain invited them. She no longer knows what she can do to just be left alone, and no one else would come into this room. Meanwhile, the emperor is resting in his room and can't stop thinking about his relationship with his wife. She has, of course, betrayed him many times, but he still hopes that someday she will get tired of communicating with others, and she will see in him the guy she fell in love with many years ago. Then no one could even think that there could be any problems in this relationship. Everything was so wonderful that the villain was even afraid that he would do what she was doing and hiding. Every evening in this room, something like this happens. First, he remembers all the wonderful things. This lasted for about several years, and then he begins to feel sad because the girl lost interest in him, and she began to think about others. The guy often looked for the problem in himself and still hasn't understood that if his wife doesn't appreciate everything he does for her and tolerates, she simply doesn't deserve to be in this place. More than 100 times he tried to come up with something, to bring back the romantic period, to make her fall in love with him again, to make different surprises, but she simply does not notice it and takes it for granted. The first time he met her, he thought that there could be nothing more beautiful in this world. She was like the meaning of life for him, without which he did not want anything. She motivated him, made him happy, and with her, the guy forgot about all the problems, even if there were too many of them. He himself did not notice at what point he faded into the background and ceased to interest her. It is surprising that such a strong and independent emperor can forgive something like this. There are thousands of other girls in the empire who dream of being alone, and he is trying to return a relationship that can no longer be saved. The most offensive thing is that only he needs it. Every time he noticed her with other guys, at first he was interested and asked questions, even destroyed some. But over time, he began to simply forgive and pay attention to it. It's simply impossible to believe, but unfortunately, he is actually capable of forgiving much more than it seems. The most unfair thing in this situation is that he can destroy or cruelly punish those who are not guilty of anything. But he forgives her, the traitor, even for treason, and not just one. She only needs to smile sweetly, and he will immediately close his eyes to all her shortcomings. The villain has been using this for a long time because she knows that he loves her so much that he will never be able to even raise his voice or look at her with an evil look. Sometimes the Emperor gets tired of this. He really misses those times when they could hug for several hours, say nice words to each other and not notice how time flies. For example, now he almost with tears in his eyes remembers that wonderful moment when she herself kissed him in the forest and promised that she would never betray him again. He dreamed of hearing this phrase for a very long time. He hadn't felt or heard anything like this for many years. I wonder how long it will last, and how long the villain will be able to manipulate him, if, of course, she will do it. The girl who got into her body understands that she doesn't really like this life, so she won't date other guys when she has the Emperor. If she reciprocates his feelings at least once, feels that he is ready to do anything for her. It is important for him to feel loved and for everything to be wonderful in their relationship. It is enough to simply love him and stop acting like a real villain. When suddenly, he got up from the bed and clearly thought of something. He had a plan, and most likely, he wants to check her words and make sure that she did not try to deceive him again. It seems like he has no patience left, and if he sees her with someone now, both that guy and she herself will feel sorry for her because this can't go on any longer. He called his assistant and said that there was a very important matter, but for this he would need his help. The assistant promised that he would do anything, and then the gentleman said that we had to wait until the morning, and as soon as Viola woke up, he must call her into this office and tell her that her husband wants to have a very serious talk with her. The Emperor said this as if this would be the most important and decisive conversation in their entire relationship. The next day came and some suspicious assistants came to Viola again. She called that woman and said that she really didn't like it, and also, if it was possible, she asked the people to change the staff and make sure that there was not a single guy among them. The woman was very surprised and hinted that it was practically impossible. She had never seen many people willing to work in this mansion, and those people who work here and now are very valuable employees, and they cannot part with them so easily. The lady started to get very angry. She doesn't understand how long this will continue and what to do about it, since she promised to be faithful to her husband. Leaving everything like this will definitely be very dangerous and undesirable for her. She will have to try very hard to make sure that they all stop coming to her and understand that there can be no more dates. In that case, she had no choice but to say it directly and say goodbye right now to each of them. Except for the assistant, of course. The girl did not hesitate and asked them never to come here again. She explained that she was no longer interested in this, and it would be nice if they forgot the way to this house, and preferably her name too. She really wants their memories to be erased, and for him to never be jealous of her again, and not think that something like this could happen again. Even the assistant was surprised by these words. She was so used to a real villain that she does not understand how a person can change so suddenly. When suddenly there was a knock at the door. Viola tensed up again, but fortunately it was not at all what she thought. As soon as she saw one of her husband's assistants, she immediately relaxed, allowed him to enter and asked what happened. The assistant apologized for coming with all the warning and explained that he had received an order from his master and had to convey some information, namely that he was waiting for his wife, and it would be better if she came to him as soon as possible. The guy even hinted with his look that their conversation would be very special and she needed to be ready for it. At that moment, the girl was very scared, because if suddenly her husband found out that these messieurs came to her, he could misunderstand everything, and because of this, he decided to have a serious talk. In any case, anything can happen during the conversation, and it would not be surprising at all if, under the guise of such seriousness, he suddenly wanted to confess his feelings to her and say something good. This has happened many times already, but the girl doesn't know about it. She started to worry a lot because her life could depend on this conversation, and this is no longer a joke. In order to somehow calm the lady down, her personal assistant approached this guy. She tried to immediately find out what the emperor was planning because she was sure that he had definitely told him something. The assistant replied that he had no idea what would happen there, and he himself was interested in what awaited the Viola. The woman still didn't believe him and even yelled at him because it couldn't be that he didn't know anything and just came to convey the gentleman's words. Viola has already come up with 1,000 options and is sure that nothing good is waiting for her. In the end, everyone started to worry. Nothing has happened yet, and they have already come up with the worst possible outcome. The assistant came up to her and tried her best to calm her down. She understands how hard it is for her now and really wants the girl not to get upset ahead of time. She asked her for only one thing: to speak to him as softly as possible, to say as many pleasant words as possible, and of course, to show respect. They both perfectly understand that the emperor had already forgiven her a lot, and accordingly, deserves at least gratitude. With all this, there is a small problem. The girl is used to the fact that until she has breakfast, she cannot talk seriously about anything or even think about any business. And since her husband asked her to hurry, this conversation will be doubly difficult than it could be. She doesn't have the strength to even think about it, let alone sort out the relationship. Right now, she would do anything just to eat at least half a portion of breakfast and gain strength. The woman said that everything would not be as hard as she thought. In any case, her husband treats her very well, and if she is honest with him, most likely he will be able to understand and forgive everything. The main thing is that if she is really guilty of something, the woman asked not to deny her guilt and sincerely apologize. She realized that the girl was not used to this and usually never admits her guilt, even when she is guilty. But now it is really important. Too much depends on it. For the first time, she asked the lady to trust her and not doubt that this is what needs to be done. Viola herself understands that the emperor deserves good treatment, but just one phrase that he urgently wants to see her makes one think that he really didn't like something, and he will definitely punish her. Since the lady had no strength, the woman took responsibility and promised that she would choose a suitable image, jewelry, and hairstyle for her. In the end, she enjoyed doing it so much that the woman even thought about changing her profession, or at least creating several images for the Viola once a month. The girl is already completely ready. She's already heading to her husband's office and realizes that she will leave him either very upset or, on the contrary, very happy. It all depends on the reason for the conversation. Before entering his room, the girl looked in the mirror again to make sure she looked good, because it could help during the conversation. She starts to have a lot of thoughts and ideas about how to behave, what to say, and whether it is worth trying to improve anything at all. Because if the guy has already decided everything for himself, it will be pointless. But she will find out about this only after she sees him and still dares to enter the office. Because she can't decide on it, everyone starts to get more and more nervous. The longer the time drags on, the more terrible the emperor seems. Surprisingly, it so happened that he seemed to guess and sense her hunger, and eventually suggested talking during breakfast. Viola was very happy, because this is what she needed. This way she will be less nervous, and in awkward moments she will be able to be distracted by food, and it will not look strange. It is as if the emperor is doing everything on purpose to make his wife as comfortable as possible. Or perhaps he just knows her well and could not leave her without food before such an important conversation. Of course, she thanked him for this concern, and admitted that she could not hold out any longer. She was very hungry, since she forgot to have dinner last night, and regretted it very much all night. In any case, it's too early to think about anything, because if he wanted to take revenge or destroy his wife, he would have done it a long time ago, and he wouldn't have to wait until the next day. It is very suspicious that he is also silent and seems to be waiting for some words from her. The guy did everything possible to make his wife worry, but still keeps the intrigue and is in no hurry to get down to the main thing. Viola tries to recognize how good or bad his mood is, but as usual, it is simply impossible to do so. Not a single emotion, neither good nor bad, can be seen on his face. It's as if he's learned to make the most neutral look possible, so that before he starts talking, no one can even guess what will happen next. Since they had been silent for too long, Viola tried to draw attention to herself and began to smile on purpose so as not to show what she was really feeling now. He starts looking at her with a very mysterious look, complicating the situation, and every time her face starts to blush, he smiles. as if this is exactly what he was waiting for. It seems that he is about to say something, and it will become clear why they have gathered here. Not only Viola is waiting for this, but also at least two of the staff. Finally, this moment came. But instead of starting with the main thing, he began to scare her even more and asked if, really, because of the fear of dying, she was smiling on purpose and trying to pretend that she had become a good wife and even learned to be grateful. Then the emperor confessed that yesterday he went into the forest only to get rid of her once and for all. But something stopped him and did not allow him to do this. After these words, the girl lost the gift of speech. She realized that she might not live to see this day. I wonder why he didn't do it, because at the very least he had all the evidence that his wife wasn't there alone and was definitely hiding something. It's very unfair that while in this body she has to correct the mistakes that the real Viola made. Without thinking twice, she decided that she didn't want all of this and thought, why not talk about it right now? If she didn't do it, everything would drag on much longer and his mistrust would grow with each passing day, as would the desire to get rid of her. The girl started without his favorite hints and said everything as it is. Viola admitted that she wants to change and she is tired of living the life that she created for herself. Supposedly, she is no longer interested in it, and it is time for a change. Of course, the emperor did not expect to hear something like this from her. He is sincerely shocked, and now everything depends only on whether he will believe her or not. Viola promised that she would no longer communicate with other guys, except for her beloved husband, whom she values very much and is afraid of losing. Kylo asked in surprise why she decided to do this now, and if she really had feelings for him back. The lady swore that their relationship would become even better and more interesting than it was initially. She really wants to go back to the time when she didn't need anyone except him. On the one hand, this is really what he dreamed of hearing from her. But on the other hand, everything sounds too perfect. Considering the fact that she betrayed him for many years and never had to apologize, this girl denied her guilt even when he brought all possible evidence. After this, her husband immediately got up and started to go somewhere, as if he decided to take some time to think everything over and make a final decision. Then he said two words, 1 week. Viola asked him to stop and explain what it meant. The guy replied that he was giving her exactly 1 week of probation, and also starting tomorrow, she would have to come to him at least once a day, and that was not up for discussion. Depending on her behavior, he will understand whether she sincerely promises all this and whether she deserves to remain in the place of the Empress, because perhaps there is someone more worthy. The guy asked if she was okay with this option, and of course, he looked at her with his special look, after which it is impossible to answer anything against. The girl agreed and said that she would try not to disappoint him. She promised to do everything possible to save this relationship and restore trust. Then he said that he was not holding her back any longer and now she could freely go about her business. The main thing was not to forget about her new responsibilities and her promises. Viola immediately ran to her room, and a few seconds later her assistant approached her. She was unable to overhear the conversation, so she came anyway perfectly at the mistress. She saw the girl lying on the bed and thought that everything was so terrible that the lady started crying and didn't know what to do now, as if she had heard terrible news. But fortunately, everything wasn't as bad as she thought. The girl explained that now the only problem is that her husband should not see her with some guy under any circumstances. Besides, she is no longer interested in it, and it would be nice to make sure that not a single stranger appears in this mansion. The assistant had never heard anything like that, because she always thought that the villain would remain the same as she was before until the end of her life, and her husband would never wait for fidelity. It turns out that until she proves it in practice, no one is going to believe ordinary words. And this takes time. A lot of time. To get rid of the terrible opinion about herself, she will need to not only give up secret dates, but also change her attitude towards others. She will need to smile, thank for something and not lie. But since there is no real villain in this body, everything is quite real. Even the assistant admitted that she hardly believes in it, but if the lady gave it to her, it would be very interesting to see how it would be. Viola warned that even if her words turn out to be another lie, it is not so, and very soon everyone will be convinced of this. The woman made a small grin, as she does not fully believe that this is even possible, and that people are capable of changing so much in a short time. She will clearly be waiting for some kind of catch. In any case, since she is her assistant, She will have to help in this matter and make sure that nothing and no one can interfere with it. She said that although she doesn't believe in her future changes, Viola can always count on her help and, of course, trust her. The girl smiled, thanked for this, and said that she understood everything, because in her place she would never have believed it either, and would have doubted it until the very end. To rest a little and gain strength, the woman offered to bring her a cup of calming tea so that Viola would fall asleep for a few hours and wake up full of energy. The lady couldn't refuse because this is her favorite tea, which she is ready to drink nonstop all day long. I wonder how long the girl can hold out and whether she will be able to accomplish everything she has planned. Meanwhile, as soon as evening came, the emperor went down to check if anything had happened that he did not know about. Although this place is always monitored by guards, no one knows what to expect from a person who is locked up here. He suddenly knocked and tried to attract attention. The guard tried his best not to look in his direction and start talking to him. He was warned that this should not be done under any circumstances. The man behind the door starts to get indignant and asks why he is ignoring him, because he understands perfectly well that he can be heard very well. They are literally 1 meter from each other. In order to make sure that guy would look at him, he offered him to take some object that looks very much like jewelry or something like that. It all looks like it's some kind of trap, and the guard shouldn't even touch what this man offers to take. This time he hinted that if he helped him get out of here and didn't tell anyone about it, he would give him much more than this gift. This man claims that if you sell this small item, you can buy a whole mansion, or maybe even several. Just at that moment, the emperor came. He heard these words and warned that if the assistant agreed or did this after some time, he would risk his life or could end up in this guy's place. The assistant saw him and replied that he had not even had such thoughts, and also that he was very offended that the emperor could think such a thing about him, because he had been working for him for many years, and during this time there had not been a hint of betrayal on his part. In order to avoid another punishment, the guy behind the door said that the emperor had misunderstood everything. He was not trying to offer anything, much less escape from here. And then he clarified that he just wanted to take a walk, since it was impossible to sit in this dark place for too long. The emperor replied that it was very funny and repeated that he had heard his every word, and it was very strange that in such a hopeless situation he was still trying to deceive him. The guy behind the door looks too confident, as if he is not afraid of anything and knows that no one will do anything to him. But is this really the same lover with whom the emperor saw his wife then in the forest? At least he looks very much like him. But that's not all. He is so afraid of nothing that he allows himself to ask the emperor where his wife is now, and hints that he would like to see her. It is simply impossible to believe, because in his situation, this is the last thing to think about. So he risks staying in this place for a very long time. It all depends on the mood of the emperor and whether he began to trust his wife instead of yelling at him and punishing him. The master asked what he needed the viola for and what he was going to do with it. It turns out that since the guy is the king in his kingdom, he dreamed of making her his wife, and now he doesn't even hide it. He seems to continue to fight for her and doesn't deny that he doesn't even plan to stop yet. The emperor replies that he is very lucky because he is in a good mood today and perhaps he can pretend that this conversation simply did not happen. But next time, he better not joke like that. Instead of changing the subject or apologizing, the detainee starts smiling and asking why he used to let them date and pretended he didn't care, but now he suddenly started saving the marriage and doing something about it. It was a very bold question. The main thing is that someone does not overestimate their capabilities and does not think that because they are the king, someone will treat them more gently. Nothing prevents the king from punishing him right now. It did not end there. The king allowed himself so much that he even decided to tell about how good it was for him and the girl until the emperor found out about it. He looks at him with such a look, as if he says anything else now, he will regret it very much and will no longer be so confident. It seems that if it weren't for his wife's recent promise, he would have destroyed him right now. But now he has hope that she told the truth and will never even think about other guys again. This is the only thing that is helping the king stay alive now. He thinks that he is not afraid of anything, in which he is very much mistaken, since he does not yet know what the emperor is capable of for the sake of his love. At some point, the emperor realized that they had nothing more to talk about, and now he had things to do that were much more important than all this. He is not at all interested in proving anything to the king, who clearly overestimates his capabilities, so he simply turned around and wished him luck, since he will soon need it very much. As usual, the king started saying different phrases to hurt the emperor and make him stay, but it didn't work. He started to get so angry that he no longer looked as confident as he was initially. His face turned red and he had a huge amount of hatred. He is so tired of being in this dark room that he already wants to walk outside for at least a few hours and come back. Meanwhile, the next day came. Today, Viola managed to get some sleep and rest. She had the strength and desire to do everything that awaits her today and the rest of the week, and maybe even more. At first, she didn't think about it, but then she remembered the most important thing. Her husband asked her to come to him every day, but it was unclear why he needed it, just to talk, or he had come up with something special. It turns out that they will have short dates, since every day they will have to come up with something new. It will be strange if at this time they will just be silent or talk about the same thing. In any case, all she needs to think about now is how to regain her husband's trust and make sure he never doubts her again. At some point, the girl accidentally looked out the window and saw that the weather was beautiful today. She immediately wanted to go outside and enjoy this beauty. She will definitely do it, but only after she approaches her husband and does all the planned things. An assistant came to her and said that from her own experience, she could say that it was better not to put off important things for later, and even better to do everything at once in the morning, so that later the whole day would be absolutely free. Viola thanked her and said that this is exactly what she had planned, since today she needed to come up with a new look. She immediately turned to her assistant with this request, who happily agreed and began to choose a suitable dress. After that, they went outside to the fountains, and at that moment, the lady could not believe her eyes. She does not understand how she could not notice all this before and was always at home. She starts to feel absolutely everything that is happening now. The girl has not experienced such emotions for a long time and did not think that it was enough to just go outside and go to the flowers. It's so beautiful everywhere here that you want to invite a lot of guests at once, organize some events and celebrate different holidays. Viola began to enjoy this beautiful scent of flowers and thought that it would be nice to put a small bouquet in her room. At some point, she accidentally saw a very beautiful light door and wanted to see what was there, because she had never been there before. Since the assistant remembered this room perfectly, she was afraid to say and pretended that she had no idea what could be seen there. At first, she was very scared, because she didn't know how the lady would react to this and how she would feel about it. Viola opens the door and realizes that she already feels some strange atmosphere. She could not even imagine that there could be something like that behind this beautiful light door. The interior here is too unusual. Everything is in red tones, and it is immediately clear what this room is intended for and why it is located in such an inconspicuous place. There are some strange objects everywhere that can only be used in one situation, but she doesn't even want to think about it or imagine anything. What attracts her most attention is the red bed, which is even scary to approach and look in that direction. Her cheeks immediately turned red. The girl couldn't help but imagine what could be done here. Apparently, the real villainess really couldn't live without all this, although it is possible that this could be the Emperor's secret room. I wonder what she is thinking about now, and why her mood has changed so abruptly. The girl has become too thoughtful, and now she doesn't even look towards her assistant. The woman decided that it would be better for her to just stand aside and not comment on anything, because if the lady herself wanted, she would ask everything herself. Besides, the assistant doesn't really like to talk about these topics. She prefers to remain silent or just step aside, so that the mistress doesn't even notice her and forgets that she is even here. After all this, Viola suddenly wondered if this was where her husband wanted to see her. Because if this was the room he was talking about, it was very strange. She didn't even want to think about it yet, because she already understood perfectly well that no matter what he offered, she wouldn't have the opportunity to refuse or even hint at it. The lady starts to worry ahead of time, although nothing has even happened yet, and she has already imagined something terrible. She is eager to find out what is going on here and why he asked her to come to him every day at the same time. The more the girl starts to think about it, the more she's afraid to see him. Even the assistant noticed this. She again gave advice that problems need to be solved as they arise, and there is no need to be afraid of anything ahead of time. So for now, everything is fine and nothing bad has happened. There is no point in being nervous and afraid of something that may not happen. A few minutes passed from that moment, and finally the emperor appeared on the street. He was a little late because he miscalculated the time and almost forgot about this meeting. Although they had agreed to meet in his room, it so happened that today they both ended up outside at the same time, and now there is no point in going into the house. It will be much more pleasant to talk here unless, of course, he invited her for something else, for which Viola is not ready and which she was so afraid of. In fact, she is very scared, but at the same time, she is trying her best to hide it and pretend that everything is okay. Viola came closer and asked if he had thought of anything interesting and what they would do today. She said that she had been thinking about it all night, and finally, this moment had come. In this case, there can only be two options. He either just wants to be together and talk about something, or he has come up with something interesting, and it will be a small date that he has been waiting for all these years. Viola said that she is in a very good mood today, and she hopes that nothing will spoil it. She tried to smile as often as possible so that everything would go in the best possible way. It helps to believe that everything is fine and there is no reason to worry. Very strangely, instead of walking next to each other, it turned out that the Emperor was in front and she was walking behind, as if she were being accompanied. They hardly talked, and for some time they just walked somewhere. Viola was afraid to ask unnecessary questions, resigned herself, and just started walking silently. At first it all seemed too boring, but at some point the guy stopped and asked what she would like now. At first, the girl didn't even understand what this could mean, although perhaps he simply had no ideas or didn't have time for this. It turns out he just doesn't want to ruin this date and is ready to make her wishes come true. He didn't have time to come up with anything at all, so we'll have to do it now. The girl replied that she wouldn't mind even just talking, and if she could come up with something, that would be even better. Besides, she was completely free today and had no plans until the evening. Since the guy also tried to finish all his business, he is also free. All that remains is to choose a place and an idea for a date. He immediately asked his assistant to do something, and surprisingly, it turned out not to be that difficult. He already had a good idea. At first, the girl thought it was some kind of picnic or something like that, but it seems that everything is a little different. He starts to sit down on the floor and invites her to come to him, but the girl doesn't see any food yet. If he wanted to sit so much, he could have just done it on the bench. The guy noticed that she didn't like something and asked if he really did something wrong. Viola can't answer anything, and all that's left is to smile and say that it just seemed that way to him, and everything is fine. In fact, she was very hungry and would not refuse lunch. But it is better not to hint about it. She just came closer and asked what all this meant. Viola imagined this conversation a little differently and thought that they would discuss some important points. She wants to make sure right now that she can relax and not think about anything bad. If she thought that sitting was very boring, then in fact he just wanted her to give him a massage. This looks very much like some kind of test, because a real villain would definitely refuse and leave without even explaining anything. Besides, he looks at her with such a look as if he expects a bad reaction. Since Viola understands everything, she continues to smile and remembers how she did this for him before. She specifically says everything he wants to hear from her. He expected anger, but in the end, she not only surprised him, but also made him happy by remembering those wonderful times. He immediately really wanted to talk about it, but since this was the first meeting, he decided to do it next time, because now it is better to talk about something neutral so as not to offend or anger anyone. After a while, everything became too awkward. They no longer know what to talk about and remember breakfast, during which everything was much simpler. Because of a little excitement, Viola can't stop thinking that at any moment he can ask an uncomfortable question, even if he promised not to do it. It's in his style. She remembers very well how he used to promise something, and then forgot and said that it was the last time, and this continued several times. She's already confused about what she expects from this date, and most importantly, the girl cannot understand if she has even a little bit of feelings for this man. She's afraid that after that betrayal, he will never be able to trust her again, and it is possible that with his good behavior, he is simply hiding the fact that he may soon take revenge and is preparing some kind of plan. Viola is afraid to talk about it, because most likely he will not believe that she is sincerely interested in it. When suddenly he said her name, which meant that now he would either suggest something interesting or ask an awkward question. The lady was very scared and admitted that she felt a little uncomfortable here and that she would be very happy if they just took a walk and didn't sit in one place. She tries not to show that in fact he is behaving too strangely, since he himself asked to come to him every day and did not come up with anything. The guy just remains silent, looks at her and waits for her to start telling something or asking something. The only person who is not nervous at all right now is him. And is it really that hard to calm her down and talk about something pleasant? Instead, he asked again and gave her a massage. The only good word he could think of during this time was that she was very good at it. Someone clearly doesn't notice that the idea with the massage was clearly not a very good one. Even though he is enjoying it now, Viola couldn't relax for a minute. At the same time, she has to smile. Thank for these strange compliments. Give a massage and be in the sun. She's also very hungry, which complicates everything 10 times. As soon as the girl stopped smiling for a second, he noticed this and asked what she didn't like. Each question is even worse than the previous one. Viola holds on, although she really wants to say everything she thinks about this date. She is very hungry. She is incredibly hot and uncomfortable being here. If they at least walked or had lunch, everything would be much better and more interesting. When suddenly he grabs her hand and unexpectedly asks her to look him straight in the eyes, as if he had thought of something again. Apparently all this time, when he was silent, the Emperor was simply preparing himself and deciding on this act. It turns out that from the very beginning, he simply really wanted to hug her, and he couldn't admit it after her recent words. Supposedly, she wouldn't mind returning their relationship and making it even better than it was. He's sure Viola wouldn't mind, and won't refuse a little kiss. The guy admitted that he can't live without it anymore, and after that incident in the forest, he wants to do it every day. Surprisingly, the girl was not scared and was even very happy. She felt that everything was fine, and in fact, he was just very worried. They need a little time to get used to it, and not be afraid of anything. Besides, they have been around for a long time, and the period of embarrassment should have passed long ago. Only now, Viola apologized and asked that if he didn't mind, to postpone this matter to another day. She is not ready now, and at the very least, she needs to prepare for this. The guy replied that he was ready to wait as long as it took, as long as everything was comfortable and pleasant for her. She is very glad that he was understanding and did not react too rudely. The Emperor did not linger and allowed her to be alone for a while. He promised to come closer to the evening if, of course, she would want to talk and would have time for it. At that very moment, her assistants came up to her and asked how everything went. They were watching what was happening from afar and could not believe that this relationship had a chance. They are very interested to know all the details, but for now, the girl asked to leave her alone and promised that if they are so interested, she will tell them about it a little later. She first needs to figure out what she wants and how she sees her future life with this person. If she keeps him waiting for too long, it will only get worse, so she needs to use the time wisely and make a decision as quickly as possible. The next day came. The Emperor woke up earlier than usual. He called his assistant and asked for a little help. He has a very important day today, which he has been waiting for more than a month. Today, there may be one very important deal that cannot be missed. He had been thinking about it and worrying about it since yesterday evening. If everything worked out, then all the other problems would disappear by themselves, at least those related to work. He had a lot of time to prepare for this day, and finally, this moment came. When suddenly he notices a man in the window and sees that he is using some kind of magic. The guy began to watch this and felt that something was wrong here. I wonder if they know each other and why this person appeared on the territory of the mansion at such an early hour without warning. It seems as if the Emperor is not very happy about his appearance and has a rough idea of who it might be. It turns out that what he didn't like most was the fact that this man allowed himself to use magic, knowing that this was the Emperor's territory, and such things were forbidden here. The Emperor is clearly not delighted, and this has already spoiled his mood for the whole day. It seems that the wizard will regret this very much. Meanwhile, at some meeting, the topic is being discussed that only those who have manifested divine abilities before the age of 30, only they can become emperor. These people are very active in discussing this topic and also want to make it so that even fewer people have the opportunity to have status. They need to do everything possible to make it very difficult and almost impossible. And that's not all. They are very worried about the fact that despite the fact that they control everything in this world, there is one person who has the abilities of a tiger, agility, strength, and everything else. They do not understand how it could happen, and naturally they consider him an enemy. Apparently someone really doesn't like that there is something they can't influence. The thing is that there are those who are specially trained and try to develop these abilities, and someone is born with them, and many don't like these people. Since they are very dangerous and do not obey anyone, this can be a very big problem if there is any conflict. When suddenly, the same guy whom the emperor saw through the window enters this office, he seemed to know where he was going and clearly ended up here for a reason. It feels like no one expected to see him here. Everyone was very surprised and didn't understand why he came. I'm very curious who he is and why his appearance causes such a reaction as if an emperor or a king had arrived. It turned out that he was a Grand Duke, a Cour Brunoir. He is a very respected person, and if he appears somewhere, there must be a serious reason for it. The guy values his time and never wastes it on meaningless events or conversations. He immediately noticed that as soon as he entered here, everyone immediately stopped talking, as if they were afraid to do so. The Duke smiled and asked to continue. He was very interested in listening to the very end. Those people reacted very quickly and came up with a new topic. They pretended that this was exactly what they were talking about, although the Duke heard everything perfectly well and understands everything. Then he sat down at his place and began to listen attentively to them further, while he did not at all show that he knew much more than they thought. The assistants were very lucky that he didn't say anything and just silently began to listen to a completely new conversation that they had just come up with. After a while, everything was supposedly decided, and they started asking how he was doing and how they could help him if needed. At some point, the Duke wanted to go to the conference room. He asked to do it right now because he knows that no one will even dare to refuse him. The guy started walking ahead, and his assistant started walking a little slower on purpose in order to talk about something and laugh. They think that they are not heard, but Kuro is so strong that he can even read the thoughts of people passing by, and few people know about it. Meanwhile, they silently walk down the corridor and accidentally notice a very beautiful girl. It turned out to be Viola, but at first she doesn't even notice them. As soon as she lifts her head up, sees unfamiliar people, and does not understand where they are going, she immediately has a lot of questions. For example, is it worth getting to know them, or is it better to just pass by? She immediately had the feeling that it would be better not to even look away and pretend that there was no one there. The woman realized that the girl was confused and decided to suggest that these people were the Grand Duke's advisors and that they were now going to some kind of conference. Viola only now realized who these people were. These were the villains from the original story. The girl was surprised that she didn't understand this right away, because even judging by their appearance, everything should be clear and obvious. She even compared them to the rotten apple of this empire, who incite all sorts of conflicts with the help of the divine horse. Thanks to him, villains can do almost anything they can think of. They have no restrictions or obstacles because he can not only help, but also protect from anyone and anything. The assistant warned that if suddenly Viola had to meet them and talk to them, she should remember that she should never, and under no circumstances, do what they say. The Grand Duke is the most dangerous of all. He is very good at manipulating, and some people do not even notice how they unconsciously begin to help him. The girl understood everything and decided that this wouldn't work with her. She would control everything and wouldn't allow anything like that to happen. Besides, these people were of no interest to her at all. It was as if she knew that one day she would have to face these villains anyway, but she didn't know when exactly. She didn't even want to talk to them because her husband was enough. As soon as they came very close to each other, the Duke's assistants greeted the lady and made a few compliments, as they usually do, to immediately dispose a person and create good relations. The only offensive thing is that there is not a drop of sincerity in this. They do it for the sake of future benefit. One of them started saying that he almost perceived her as an angel. Another started admiring her beautiful hair, and the third just smiled, and that said it all. Then their leader came up. He showed respect, but even at that moment, the girl felt that it was not even worth paying attention to, since every word and action of theirs was carefully thought out in advance. At first, she was a little scared and even confused, but at some point, she realized that she was no longer afraid of anything. She just needed to pass by and try to never appear near them again. The Grand Duke started saying different compliments again, as if he was trying to please her and be remembered for a long time. He does all this with a confident look, which once again proves that this is just a plan and everything is being done on purpose. He may not care at all about her appearance, but in order to create a good impression of himself and have a good relationship in the future, he had to do it. Just like everyone else. It was her turn to speak, so Viola immediately smiled and said that this was a very unexpected meeting. She thanked him for all these wonderful words and hinted that unfortunately she would have to go on business. It turns out that the Grand Duke is familiar with the villain, but Viola sees him for the first time. She doesn't know it yet. The guy felt that her energy had changed a lot, and surprisingly, the guy was not mistaken. Since in this case there is already a completely different person. This is not the Viola he was familiar with. The girl started to get nervous. She wasn't ready for this. And at that moment, the assistant started to prompt something very timely. Viola was able to hear her and understood that she needed to answer. She said that it was very strange because she herself didn't notice anything like that, and no one said anything. Then suggested that most likely they hadn't seen each other for so long that he simply forgot and confused her energy with someone else's. After that, they immediately said goodbye, and finally the lady was able to relax. It was not the most difficult, and not an easy conversation. In general, it is very good that it was not too long, and now she is free. After saying goodbye, Viola felt as if all the mood she had had since the morning had suddenly disappeared somewhere, and it happened right after this conversation. The girl remembers very well that when she looked into his eyes, she immediately felt that he didn't seem to hate her but didn't love her either. It was very strange and incomprehensible. She still has mixed feelings. She immediately thanked her assistant because it was much easier for her with her. She felt support and was more confident. But that's not all. The Duke in turn also noticed something strange before he could easily read the villainess's thoughts. But now he couldn't do it. That's why he noticed that she didn't have the same energy as before. He thought about it but still didn't understand what was going on. Viola was so worried that she asked to make her some calming tea. She thought that since this person was on the territory of the mansion, he was obviously here for a reason. She really wanted to know what he was doing here and whether he was planning something bad. The assistant believes that the Emperor should deal with this, since it is not their business, and they will not be able to prevent the villain from doing what he has planned even if they really want to. The most they can do is warn her husband about it so that he can deal with it himself. The assistant advises not to think about it too much, because this guy is not here for the first time. And since the Emperor allowed him to be here, he probably controls everything and watches him. The girl smiled and replied that perhaps the assistant was right after all, and there was no point in getting involved in other people's business, because at the very least she was not an empress. After she took a sip of tea, it became much better. The girl thanked the woman again, because in fact, with her it was so comfortable, as if with a best friend. And that's not all. Viola suddenly remembered that this matter could still concern her, but only if she had some secret relationship with this person in the past, and now she really needs to know about it. Accordingly, the only person who knows everything is the assistant. The girl warned that she understands how strange this question is, but she really needs to know if there was something between her and the villain in the past. Too much could depend on this, and if something did happen, she could take advantage of it and make sure that if the villain wanted to do something bad to her husband, he wouldn't succeed. And if not, then it's still for the best. Now she needs to have as little attention from other guys as possible to her. At that moment, the woman thought that she just misheard. She asked again, because she didn't expect to hear something like that. And in order not to create an awkward situation, in response the lady just laughed. Well, since the girl already asked, she answered that this had never happened. Moreover, she doesn't even imagine these people together, and doesn't understand why the lady is suddenly interested in this and how she can't remember this. It's one thing to forget about a relationship with some little-known guy whom she met no more than once, but another thing is a Grand Duke, with whom even a meeting is impossible to forget for the rest of your life. In that case, the girl was not shy and asked for one request. From that moment on, if a guy walks towards them or they just see someone, the assistant must say whether the lady had any kind of relationship with him. This is a very strange request, but the woman pretended not to be surprised at all. She didn't quite understand why this was necessary, because only a person who had lost his memory could ask for something like this, and as far as she knew, Viola had never had anything like this. The woman couldn't help but admit that recently the girl had become like a different person, and she didn't understand how to explain it. The girl herself doesn't know how to explain it, but she doesn't have another friend. She didn't explain anything. She just pretended that there was nothing wrong with it and it was a completely normal request. The woman looked at her as if she had heard something that was very difficult and almost impossible to understand. She had noticed lately that she had too many questions. She has no choice but to use influence and promise that everything will be done. The woman understands that if she asks any questions now and sorts everything out, the lady may change her tune and she will lose her mood for the whole day. Meanwhile, another conference is taking place. Everyone is very serious, worried, and waiting for the word of the emperor, who is nervous no less than everyone else, since he has a huge responsibility and a lot depends on his decisions. This man is a guest of the emperor's assistant. He very often advises and suggests something to him. From the outside, it is sometimes clearer how best to act or respond. They have been cooperating for many years, so the emperor completely trusts his opinion and sometimes even changes his decision in favor of what the assistant suggests. Today's thematic conference, the most serious conflict with the neighboring empire, the emperor asked that no one be embarrassed to express their true opinion, because if everyone remains silent and does not suggest anything, nothing will change, and the conflict will continue for a very long time. Despite these words, some are still afraid to say anything. Most of the assistants want to hear the emperor's proposal, since at first they start the conversation very nervously. One of the assistants could not resist and began to argue that water supply was crucial for crossing the desert, so he created a container for water in which it would never evaporate. The emperor accepted this idea and asked how exactly it could be implemented, because it would require time and some resources, which they didn't have very much of. At some point, His Majesty looked at it and decided that there was no point in it, and asked to voice this idea if there was one. But after such an answer, it is unlikely that anyone would want to say anything else. The next idea was to create an invisible cloak with which one could easily penetrate into enemy territory and attack him. The emperor even refused to discuss this and asked for this idea. The next assistant suggested creating work shoes that would be easy to move around in during a pandemic. Because as you know, without pre-treatment of shoes, this process can take longer than with it, but he didn't like it. And this, after a few minutes of discussion, one of the assistants asked if this conflict was so important to ask him such a serious question. This is a very strange question. And yet, the second assistant supported him, showing that they should not focus on this, but on divine creations. Another person joined the conversation. He reminded them that they only had 6 months left, and during this time they had to not only decide what was important to them, but also solve one of the problems. When suddenly, the assistant who had not yet managed to speak began to be very indignant and reminded that the best epidemiologists for what they say and ensure his greatness assume that they allowed to propose different ideas does not mean that you need to propose something without even thinking about the consequences. Most were very doubtful and thought that they really said less, and then began to apologize and promise that in future they would only offer thoughtful proposals that actually made sense. Meanwhile, the next day came. Everything started just fine. In very nice and warm weather, a wonderful scent of flowers could be heard from the window. Viola was able to sleep well and had a very good rest outside. She stopped thinking about the bad and tried to focus only on the beautiful, and she is very good at it. Elizabeth entered the room. She apologized for coming without making any comments, and immediately began asking how the mistress thought of herself. Because of this, the girl immediately lost that inner harmony that she had had just a few minutes ago. Viola looked at this assistant and could not remember whether they had seen her or not, and yet she became interested in finding out what had happened and why she had entered her room for the first time without attention, without waiting for permission to enter. It turns out she came to tell terrible news. The thing is that during the conference, her husband lost his temper and destroyed one of his assistants, just because he said something wrong. The girl couldn't believe it because in all the time she's been in this body, she's never seen him aggressive or heard of anyone being hurt by him. The assistant warned that today, His Majesty is very aggressive, and it is better not to approach him with such news. But for some reason, she tells it as if she is happy about it. Although perhaps it just seemed to Viola, she wanted to continue telling everything in detail, but the girl stopped her and said that that was enough. She already understood everything and there was no need to spoil her mood, and even more. The maid apologized and said that she probably hadn't thought about it because she was too surprised and wanted to tell him everything she had learned in detail. It turns out that Viola wasn't imagining things. The maid was really smiling, and this was what the lady didn't like the most. She asked what was funny about the fact that one person died today and asked for an explanation. The assistant didn't think twice and immediately explained that the villain used to be very happy about such events, and they always laughed together. as if some kind of holiday had taken place. The maid was so used to this that she unconsciously began to rejoice and talk about it, as if about something good. In fact, the real villain was really happy only when someone had problems or grief. Only after that she had a smile and a good mood. Nothing could make her happy except someone's death or just bad news. When everything was fine with everyone, when everyone was having fun or celebrating some good event, on this day she just couldn't bear it. She was very angry and began to hate everyone. But since there is now another person in this body, the maid will have to get used to it. Now she looks at the mistress and does not understand how she could have changed so much in such a short time while they have not seen each other. Viola said that this time she forgives her, but next time, if this happens again, the assistant will be punished. The girl apologized and promised that this would never happen again. She would never laugh in such situations again, and she would never come in unannounced like before. As soon as she left the room, she immediately wanted to discuss it with her colleagues. She wondered if she was the only one who noticed the changes, because the lady really seemed to have become a different person. She started running towards them as fast as if nothing more interesting had ever happened. It seemed like someone really didn't like it, and everyone liked the previous villain much more than the current one. At this point, the maid doesn't even realize that she's not the only one surprised by these changes. Everyone has been talking about this for a long time. The staff is divided into two groups. Some are delighted, and some, on the contrary, want everything to return and be like before. The girl is so angry, as if there was some benefit for her in this before, but now there will be nothing. Meanwhile, evening came and someone brought Viola her favorite tea. She really likes to drink it at this time and enjoy the beautiful evening sunset. The girl thanked her for this and said that she just wanted to ask her to prepare her favorite tea. The assistant seemed to sense this and did everything very timely. Now she doesn't even think that, in fact, the assistant didn't just bring this tea for no reason, since she has never seen the lady since. According to her colleagues, she has changed a lot. She became interested in checking if this is really true. The thing is that the real villain treated this particular assistant very badly and warned her more than once that she would fire her very soon, without even explaining the reason and what she needed to do to correct her guilt and convince the lady. After the assistant brought her tea, she came back and started telling that the lady had really become a completely different person. She was simply unrecognizable, but she really liked it. Meanwhile, the head maid, who is a personal assistant, also wanted to come to Viola and ask why everyone was trying to enter her room today, as if there was something interesting and unusual there. She enters the room and sees that Viola is very happy about something. She is very happy and cannot contain her emotions. The woman has already gotten used to the fact that the mistress does not cease to surprise her each time. Now she has only one question. She really wants to know if it is true that God almost punished one of the assistants today who was happy about the bad news. The girl replied that everything was like that. She doesn't understand how one can happily talk about how her husband destroyed someone, and for no reason, just in the middle of a conversation at a conference. The woman said that when she found out about this, she could not believe that the gentleman had again started to show aggression towards someone. This had not happened for several months, and it seemed that everything was just beginning, and then he needed to be prepared. She really wants to warn the lady that during such a period, it is better not to talk to him at all about anything bad, and especially not to accuse him of anything or ask him, since this can be dangerous even for her. The girl replied that she understood everything and thanked him for this advice, and then slightly hinted that now she really wanted to be alone, in peace and quiet. Meanwhile, the emperor unexpectedly completed all his planned tasks, and he finally had time to remember his favorite thing and ride horses. Previously, he was able to ride almost every day, but now too many things have accumulated, because of which sometimes he even forgets about the existence of these beautiful animals. He often suggests this to one of his assistants, but more often than not, he goes out alone. Today, someone agreed and supported this idea, so this time he is not bored. But in reality, he simply doesn't know that most of the time, assistants agree to ride only so that he can then allow them to take a few days off. They just hide the fact that they don't really like this sport, and all for the sake of getting benefits and not upsetting the gentleman. And yet, each time he begins to feel it, he sees dissatisfied faces. Although before he did not understand what this could be connected with, and did not even suspect anything. But today is a special day. Absolutely everyone agreed to go for a ride, This has never happened in the entire history of their cooperation. I wonder what this means. It all looks very much like some kind of conspiracy or something like that. In any case, everything will soon become clear. Just wait until the end of the day and everyone will start asking for something. At some point, the girl was lying on her bed in her room and suddenly thought about waiting until the evening and doing something. She went out into the hallway with a flashlight and started to go somewhere purposefully, as if she had something in mind and wanted to see something that she couldn't see during the day, because she might be noticed. At first, she was very scared, because at any moment everything could go wrong and nothing would work out. She would want to turn back time, but it would be too late. And yet, it is very interesting what she has in mind and where she is heading. The girl tries to walk as quietly as possible so that no one hears anything and does not want to leave the room to check who it is and where the sound is coming from. The lady thinks over every step very carefully and constantly wants to go back so as not to make another mistake and not meet a person whom she does not really want to see. And yet, she did not expect that along the way someone could interfere with her. Viola met her husband's main assistant, and at that very second, she had to come up with something to say what and why she was doing here. The assistant guards his master's office and does not let anyone near him, even if someone is very urgent and needs to talk to him. First, he asked how he could help, to which the girl replied that her husband was waiting for her. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. And some time ago, they agreed that she would come to him once a day and might not warn him about it. Since the assistant didn't know this, he had to explain everything, although most likely she didn't come here for this at all, but for a completely different reason. The man began to doubt and said that he could not allow her to enter his room since no one had warned him about this. They have strict rules, and before she goes there, he must clarify everything with the gentleman. Without this, nothing will work. He doesn't want to remain guilty and punished just because he believed his wife. On the one hand, he is really right, and being an assistant, he does his job well, but on the other hand, it will be very difficult to come to an agreement with him. Since he knows the former villain very well, he has no reason to trust her at all. The man knows that she had a very bad relationship with her husband and that she constantly betrayed him. Therefore, he does not believe a single word she says. Viola started to get very worried, because if she didn't think of something now, she would have to go back to the room and nothing would work out. It's strange that she didn't come up with this moment and remembered that you can really only get into your husband's office after he informs his assistant about visitors. The man reminded her again that there was no point in discussing anything now because he had no right to let her go anyway. He didn't want to waste time on these conversations and suggested that she just accept it and go and rest. The girl began to get very indignant, but only in her thoughts. She doesn't say anything out loud and tries to the last to create the impression of a very polite person so as not to spoil anything and not make things worse. She has no ideas at all, and the longer she is here, the more likely it is that the assistant will simply chase her away and even more carefully monitor her so that she does not appear near this room. In fact, she is not offended by him. On the contrary, she admires his professionalism. It's just that now it really bothers her, but otherwise everything is fine. Viola couldn't hold back and started asking what else she needed to do or say so that he would stop resisting and allow her to enter this room, since she was the emperor's legal wife and had the right to do so. The man understands everything perfectly, but he has rules, for the violation of which he risks losing his job, the trust of this person, and may even be punished. Viola didn't even listen to it. She wasn't at all interested in what would happen to him for it, and it was very strange, really. She really has a very important mission, because of which she doesn't care at all about other people. Literally recently, everything was different, and in any other situation, she would not have behaved as persistently as she is now. In the end, a miracle happened. The man couldn't resist, and still allowed her to come in. He opened the door and let the gentleman's wife in. She was able to get to him, which means that something interesting is about to begin, because usually the girl didn't even leave the room at this time. She just rested and drank her favorite tea, and now she suddenly wanted to see her husband. Although perhaps this is just a cover that does not mean anything, but for some reason, he is crying and is clearly upset about something. As soon as he saw her in his room, he was very surprised and asked the assistant what happened and why he didn't warn him that someone wanted to see him. The man explained that his wife was too persistent and he couldn't refuse her. He explained that he himself did not understand why she wanted to see him so much and refused to go back to the room. At that moment, she didn't say anything special to him. She just stood there and pretended that she just came to support him, even though she had no idea what had happened to him. The next day came. No one understood why she came and why she wanted to see him so much. The girl just silently went to her room and did not explain anything, although everyone had a lot of questions to which they had no answer. She asked for her favorite tea again and tried to think it all through very well. She realized that she hadn't thought everything through yesterday, and because of that she had lost a lot of time. It turns out that the only reason why she left yesterday, literally half an hour later, the girl was simply tired, since she was used to being asleep at this time and not doing anything. Today she wanted to choose a dress, apply makeup, and do her hair herself. She even canceled half of her assistant's work and said that most of them would have a day off today. Everyone began to be even more surprised by this, since it was unclear what she had in mind. The lady constantly tries to be alone, does not allow anyone to enter the room, and also constantly walks along the corridor in the evening completely alone. Previously, she often talked to her assistant for several hours in a row, but now she doesn't even communicate with her, apparently in order to concentrate, which is very strange, since she usually constantly prompted and often helped Viola. Even her husband was surprised by yesterday's event. It turns out that she asked to make tea so early, and 2 servings, in order to have a small tea party with the person with whom she hadn't managed to talk yesterday. She said that she missed him very much, and if he didn't mind, the girl suggested having breakfast together and discussing something interesting. He starts asking a lot of questions, but she doesn't let him do it, asking her own, as if she's avoiding and doesn't want to talk about something. The girl is trying her best not to show that this conversation is much more important than it seems to him. She wants to understand if he is happy to see her and if he has changed his attitude over all this time, if he has begun to trust, and how their relationship has changed in general. Since they hadn't been able to see each other for the last few days, she decided to rectify the situation and took the initiative, hoping that he would appreciate it and understand that she hadn't forgotten her promise and sincerely wanted to try for their happiness, since he didn't have the strength or time for that yet. At some point, he was already tired of not being able to say a single word. His wife constantly interrupts and does not let him do it. As soon as he raised his voice a little, Viola immediately got upset and didn't even try to hide it. She got up from her chair and looked at him with such a look as if she was very offended and was about to go about her business. The girl starts to get indignant at how he can allow himself to do something like that while she is trying to make this relationship better, and he is just ruining everything. After that, he just lay down on his bed and stopped listening to her. The emperor was tired of listening only to her and all these indignations. The guy started thinking about his problems and tried not to even notice his wife. She saw this and began to get even more indignant, although she perfectly understands that she is a little wrong. She was probably so worried that she lost control of herself and started to get upset with him even without a reason. She felt very sorry. Viola turned away and almost cried. She was very upset that in order to save this relationship, you need to try very hard, especially her. And all because the real villain did everything possible for many years to ruin them, and she succeeded. Meanwhile, the guy is just sitting on his bed and is very focused on something, thinking. It is very interesting what his wife will choose, to come to him and apologize, or to leave and consider him guilty. If she chooses the second option, she will only make things worse. It all depends on how much she wants to regain his trust, and in general, whether she wants to do the best or she doesn't care. Of course, she had the idea to leave because it was the easiest and fastest option. But at some point, she realized that she definitely didn't plan to make another mistake. Since a problem had arisen, it needed to be solved right here and now, and not put off until later. Viola approached her husband and asked him not to be offended. She said that she had a very strange day today, and it was hard for her to control herself. Also, she allowed him to yell at her and say everything he thought. If, of course, after that, he would feel better. The emperor clearly did not expect such behavior from her. On the one hand, he is very pleased that she admits her guilt, but on the other hand, it is very unusual for him to get used to these changes. He had never heard an apology from her before. He was always the one apologizing, even when it was her fault.